there's probably a reason why the Speedmaster is one of the best-selling lines from Amiga, and it's been around since 50, 60 years, whatever it is, looking pretty much the same, but evolved internally, exploited by Amiga as their iconic watch. But they hit on something with the design of that watch. It's been to the moon. You've got the whole romance, and then you got modern technology. You've got the Metas tested movements, which couldn't have been barely imagined rather in the 1960s. So you've got to love how it looks. It just works a lot better today than it did 50 years ago.
Perhaps these brands just never really die. Maybe we just love playing archaeologist, and they're unearthed when we're ready to, or somebody with the foresight and the deep pockets to do so. Hello, welcome to Watch World. It's been a minute, Mark, since we last met. How are you?
No change in the last 60 seconds.
So it's been this summer since we've last had an episode together. What have you been up to?
That sounds a bit scary, doesn't it? Had an episode together. My God, no. What have I been up to? I've been riding my bike. I've been just generally faffing about, and doing my volunteering at the food bank, and all okay really. Keeping an eye on the world of watches, which is going through some interesting times. But yeah.
Very much so. We're looking forward to talking about that. Well, thank you as always for joining me. First things first, I would like a wrist review, please, Mr. Toulson. What are you wearing?
Well, today, and it's on loan, I'm wearing the Deep Raider by Favre-Leuba, which I'm sure looks backwards on here, but it's a very, very charming stainless steel dive watch. Ironically enough, it's based on the Deep Blue, which apparently they can't use that name anymore, Favre-Leuba, and it was released in 1964, the same year I was, ironically enough, and I'm not sure which of us looks more attractive. On the balance, I think it's probably the watch, but it's a faithful recreation of the Deep Blue and kindly lent to us by Neil Duckworth at Veritime.
Yeah, and that's relevant to what this episode's about. So I'm going to talk about the two watches that I'm wearing, and I'm going to launch straight in, because we're talking today about re-editions, brands that have had a hiatus, a period of dormancy, and then have been brought back to life. But I'm on my right wrist, I have got a beautiful Universal Genève. And this is on loan from Tortoise Watches. Mm-hmm. It's a 31mm caliber 256. It's 14 karat yellow gold, and it's got a beautiful bracelet. It's almost like a piece of jewelry. I wouldn't quite say it's a Milanese bracelet, but something quite similar. So if you're sort of trying to watch it, but I'm really taken with this piece. Mm-hmm. Elegant, vintage looking, as you know, I always like a vintage looking watch. And then I'm doing that awful thing where I'm wearing two watches, which I really hate about our industry. But for the purposes of this episode, I'm also wearing a Chapek, and this is a Quai de Berge, which is a re-edition of their pocket watch. The Quai de Berge was named after the collection was named after their first workshop in Geneva. And this links to sort of the DNA running from their original heritage through to their current collection. So, which is a really nice segue into the episode itself. And you and I have talked about this a little bit. And this, to give some context, this has stemmed from Universal Genève. It was originally due to relaunch again this year, actually in September, October of 2025. It's now been pushed back until next year. But it got us thinking about brands that have had a hiatus. So the question, and I suppose the conversation for today, are some brands just truly never die. They just wait for the right moment to return, I suppose. And in the watch world, there's something quite mythical about the resurrection story. Yeah. A name that has been dormant for decades or centuries and suddenly comes back carrying history, heritage, and obviously a little bit of hype. You know, when you've got someone like Breitling, who are the people that are bringing back Universal Genève, there's certainly going to be a lot of hype and marketing behind it. So today we are exploring those phoenix moments, brands that were once famous and then disappeared, sometimes because of politics, sometimes because of technology, and sometimes just because the people behind them have just vanished. And yet here they are again, back on wrists, back in boutiques, and back in collectors' conversations.
Yeah, and it's I mean, it's a massive subject, and in some ways, it's more about brands and personalities than actual products, because I suppose we're trying to understand the psyche of the founders, or what drove them to form a watch brand, and then what happened. Uh, why did they disappear? Was it, as you said, external factors? Was it politics? Was it industry changes, taste changes, bad management, financial mismanagement? And then for those that came back, what was the stimulus to bring them back? And I guess one of the things is, I guess we know about the brands that have come back, because obviously that's part of their story. What we don't know about necessarily are all those brands that, say, failed in the 1800s that were never heard of again. So we're almost just talking about the successes of failures, if that kind of makes sense. Why did certain brands fail, and why did they come back? Because they're the only ones we really know about. I don't think anybody's done a book or a piece on these are watch brands that failed. I'm not quite sure having failure in the title maybe makes it as a great selling point.
Yeah,
but anyway, we're gonna. Sorry,
you're not the best marketeer on that
no,
one, are you?
no, I'm not. No, that's true. But
so
we
sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say we're going to mention Bovet and Chapek and Moser and Favre-Leuba as I waved in front of you, and obviously Universal. I think those are some interesting ones that we were going to mention.
Yeah, there are a few of them about, as you say, the ones that we know about. Fears is another one that was family run, and that's the 10 years they've been back up and running. They're celebrating their centenary as well, which actually leads me to my first question, because that one is about the founder. Do you feel that the DNA of the founder really survives through the centuries?
I think it rather depends, doesn't it? It kind of depends. I mean, we've worked in the watch industry for a long time, and in many ways, watch brands that have been around for 100 years or more, they celebrate the past in most cases with reeditions of old models, or we did this in 1952 and we're reissuing it now because it's the anniversary, or what have you. And so in some ways it's a backward-looking industry, but it's quite also forward-looking in terms of new technology that goes inside the watches. So a Speedmaster looks pretty much like a Speedmaster from the 50s, but there's a lot more going on inside that's improved the watch. So you've got that celebration of history, but you've got that modernity aspect as well. So how does that play into the DNA? Well, on a product basis, it is celebrating the watches from the past, but then there are certain occasions where there are old established names that have been resurrected that probably don't pay any, I'm going to use the word respect, and I don't mean that disrespectfully, but don't necessarily respect or reflect the history of the brand. So the one that springs to mind is H. Moser. Heinrich Moser was making watches in Schaffhausen, and now the current owners of the brand do something completely different. And probably the only similarity that Moser watches have with the past is that they tell the time. But I love Moser. I think they do some fantastic things, but I don't think they're referencing a style of watch from the original founder.
H. Moser is very much a celebration of its current guise, isn't it?
Yes.
There's very little association with its origins.
Mm-hmm.
However, some of the others, so we're looking at sort of Chapek, the piece that I'm wearing, that is, as I said, it's a reedition of one of their pocket watches from when they first in their origins. But to your point on nobody knows about the brands that haven't yet been resurrected, obviously it's a valid point, because we don't know what we don't know. Some brands like Favre-Leuba, they've gone into hiatus twice, and yet still someone's had the ambition, the vision, the audacity perhaps to actually recognize, because it's the second oldest brand, isn't it, after Blancpain, that there is some real there's a real opportunity to bring this brand back to life and back to market.
Yeah, and I think in that particular case of Favre-Leuba, again, the roots in history probably play a part in why it's sort of resurrected. So for whatever reason, the brand was distributed and sold really well in India. And I think in 1945, India was Favre-Leuba's biggest market. And curiously enough, the current owners of the Favre-Leuba name are Tata, which is Titan Watches, and which is the Titan company, and Ethos Watches, which I think is a subsidiary, the biggest watch retailer in India. So there's a connection. Obviously, in India, they probably know Favre-Leuba a lot better than maybe we do in the UK. So that might be the stimulus for Favre-Leuba coming back, because it's got some resonance with India, and the owners are from India.
Yeah, it's also got Patrick Hoffman behind this one,
Yes.
formerly from Uly's Nardan,
Yep.
and the design concept and of this brand. So it's got a good design and a great team that's already well integrated into the industry, very well known, well respected, well connected. So it should really be given the right opportunity to soar, I suppose. You've referenced in terms of sort of some of the reasons as to why some of these brands do fail. So force of collapse, do they ever die, or do we think they just hibernate? Like, I suppose, is it political shocks? You've referenced, touched on the quartz crisis, or leadership voids.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's sort of what do you do with the family business, effectively, and I mean, if you take the case of Heinrich Moser, for H. Moser, I think his son wasn't that much interested in watchmaking. He was more of an adventurer and traveller, so he disappeared off around the world. So there may be an element of what's the continuity for the brand, but also I think with H. Moser, for reasons of whatever, they were heavily invested in selling watches in Russia. And then you had obviously the Russian Revolution in the early 1900s, and I think that disrupted their business. So maybe there was two elements there. Chapek, I mean, that was an interesting one, because that seemed to be like one of those kind of horological mysteries. Chapek just disappeared, didn't he? I mean, some said he died, but there are no particular records saying that, Chapek died, and then the brand just kind of withered away into nothing until it was resurrected by three guys, I don't know, 10 or so years ago, whenever it was.
Was Chapek was crowdfunded, wasn't it?
It was indeed, yeah. I think they got about 100 people, raised about 1.1 million Swiss francs to restart the brand. And obviously, there must have been some love in the crowdfunding community for the return of that brand, but I think they also presented the opportunity to buy the first watches, and there's obviously a lot of people with a lot of money who quite like the idea of that. But I mean, the people who kind of re-established the brand were Xavier de Roquemorel, who, I mean, he had an interesting background. He was, I think he was L'Oreal. I think he was. He'd worked in other industries, and then he worked at Ebel and Concord. And Ebel actually is probably a case study in how to mess up a brand with Ebel. I'm not saying he had anything to do with it, but that was in the 1980s. Ebel was a big deal, and now you don't really hear about it. And then you had Sébastien Folliner. He was IWC, and Gerard Perregaux. So and Grubel Forsey. So he was like a proper watchy person. And then Harry Gould, who was more into art. I think he sort of established the Art Basel thing. So those three guys obviously had a vision about resurrecting Chapek, were interested in the story, sold the dream, got 100 people to invest in it, and here we are with the lovely watches they produce today. So that's their resurrection, really.
Yeah, there's quite a difference between Bovet, as an example, that was a sort of a passionate collector who's invested in that brand, Mr. Raffi, and versus Universal Genève, which, as we already referenced, is Breitling, where it will have the big dollar behind them. and give them the opportunity to
Yep.
rebrand, restart again, taking that heritage. But we've already, because we referenced, I think earlier this year about the pole router, and it's quite similar what they're doing to the original. Is that correct? Have I got that right?
I mean, I would imagine they are. So we won't know till 2026 exactly what they're doing. But there's such rich heritage in Universal, with the pole router, the Genta designed, anti-magnetic watch used by your Swedish airline pilots flying over the Arctic, and those watches have been the original pole routers from the 50s, 60s, what have you. They've been selling really well on in the vintage collectors market, and obviously Tortoise watches in Gray's Antique Market just off Oxford Street. They've got some, which is why you're wearing one. And they did other famous things. They were the first tri-compax chronographs, so the three dial chronographs. And they had fans. Eric Clapton wore them, and Rindt, the racing driver, and his girlfriend Nina Rindt. So that's why you have it's a Nina Rindt if it's a white dial with black subdials, or an evil Nina if it's a black dial with white subdials. You've got all that collector's nomenclature, a word I really like, that sort of throws in there to make things interesting for watch people. But I would imagine Breitling are going to do things with those iconic collections. And they made ultra slim watches. I mean, there's so much Universal to look forward to. And I think I'm just trying to rack my brains for what George Kern said about it. It's going to be the most important brand of the 21st century. Now, he's not a man short of hyperbole, is Mr. Kern, but he not only talks the talk, he walks the walks. I mean, he's a clever guy, so you can imagine Universal's going to be fascinating.
Yeah, they've certainly got the corporate muscle behind them to deliver on that statement. And as I'm not sure he would be making statements like that if he didn't believe it.
Sure he does,
going back to the word we used earlier, audacity. It's why not. So I suppose it's who has the right to bring back a brand, and whether it's the crowdfunding element or the corporate muscle, just that romantic founder. For Mr. Raffi, for example, with Bovet, and what they've done there, because there was no link with his background to the origins. I think they've got a pharmaceutical background, actually.
It was legal and pharmaceutical, yeah. But as you say, I mean, they always like to weave some romance. These guys with great vision and lots of money, they like to, obviously weave some romance into it. But his granddad was a great watch collector, and it reminds him of his granddad from what I read. And he had Bovets in his collection, so he felt that affinity and warmth, that familial warmth with his granddad and his granddad's watch collection. And I think he bought Bovet in, was it 2001 or something, and set about reintroducing those artisanal crafts that Bovet are so famous for. The enameling and the beautiful engraving work that they do now. You can imagine that's what they were doing, in the 1800s, etc., 1900s.
So I was going to ask, is Resurrection better driven by a romantic collector or a balance sheet? And I suppose time will tell. And I think they're probably different collectors, so you've got Universal, let's refer that to balance sheet, and then you've got romance for Bovet. And Bovet isn't necessarily it's not a commercial brand per se, not in the way that Breitling are and some of the others and I suppose Chapek certainly isn't either. These are much more niche, specialist, individual brands. So I wonder if that's got the collector community behind it versus the general masses.
Well, I mean, none of these guys are doing it for fun. They're not going to do it to make a loss. So there is a balance sheet element, I would imagine, to all of this. And I mean, as you've referenced, one of the sort of founding things about your podcast and your watch world is the stories, and you always like to think that the stories that are written in the marketing speak are true, and I'm bought into all that stuff. But so the Pascal Raffi, my granddad's watch collection, I love that story. The three guys who set up or re-established Chapek they said at board meetings they had a fourth chair for Chapek to sit in. Obviously, it was an empty chair, but the whole idea being, what would Chapek think about what we're doing? And I hope that's a true story. I long to believe it is, because it's a nice story, but I think more broadly and democratically, again from what I read and conversations I've had, with Chapek, they also have a bit of a panel of people they like, people who collect watches, have a bit of an input on designs. I think I get the information that they do talk to people and say, what do you think we should do with this, or should we make it bigger, smaller, different dial colors, etc. So I think there is that democratic element, that they're ensuring that the public that they are selling to are already queued up to getting what they want. If you take the Antarctique, the integrated sports watch from Chapek, which is a lovely watch. It's in the same idea as a Nautilus, as a Royal Oak, as a kind of design. But I think it's something that the fan base bought into, and it wouldn't have been something that Chapek was particularly thinking about when he was establishing his watch brand before he mysteriously died.
Mysteriously died. It's that forward-thinking element that the brand's now embracing. We met with Breguet last night. It's their 250th anniversary this year, and whilst they're very proud of its 250 years uninterrupted, so the complete opposite of what we're discussing today, that whole a watch doesn't just tell a time, it tells a story, which is what I believe, and why I want to continue doing this, because it's the stories and the anecdotes that keep coming out. Gregory Kissling, the CEO of Breguet, was there. They launched the Oramonde yesterday. It's not a new watch for them, but it was a brand new dial. But the story that we were told last night, which was, like you've just referenced, I hope it is true, was based on their subscription watch. And he claims and associates the success of the continuation of the brand down to the subscription, because in the 1800s, Breguet wasn't necessarily a accessible price point as the same as it is now. But what they had done was 25% of the watch was you paid for 25% of the watch, and then you paid it off and it was your subscription. Ergo the name and the birth of it. And he single-handedly accredited the success of Breguet to that one watch. So they launched it this year as part of their anniversary and the celebrations, and it is beautiful. It's done with Breguet gold. We've seen it a little bit with some other brands where their metal types, they have to have patents, so they're specific to the brands, and it is very beautiful. It's a cross between yellow and rose gold. But it's really interesting that he can pinpoint the moment that the brand succeeded, and potentially if Abraham Louis Breguet didn't have that foresight, and a bit similar to how Chapek, the team at Chapek are now, where they're getting other people involved in designers, potentially this might be a brand that didn't last the test of time, and it might be something that was look to be reinvented at a later stage. Thankfully, because it is one of my favorite brands. It's incredibly beautiful, and this year that's the pieces that they have launched. But that's the story about the subscription, which falls under the Tradition collection, was just wonderful. And it was just how, if one person didn't have the foresight, and that was a marketing approach and a financial decision. It wasn't product led, and therefore the history and the legacy of the brand had continuation. Heritage versus reinvention. Is heritage a duty or just a license to reinvent? Because I suppose this goes back to the Moser example, perhaps, in that there isn't the heritage as part of the story. I wonder if Resurrection needs fidelity to history for it to be successful.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, I don't think Heinrich Moser ever envisaged his brand making a watch with a case made out of cheese, or the Frankenstein watch, or even could envisage Vanta Black on the dials, or any of those amazing things that Moser have done. So I would say you can have it both ways. Moser is an expression of I don't know, talent from the Malin family, whereas you've got certain brands that reference their past. Like for example, I say the Favre-Leuba, the Chapek you're wearing, and then you've got some occasions where a brand becomes known for a certain model, perhaps that um, was way beyond their founders. I don't think we can. I don't think we can suggest that the person who sets up a watch brand, they're perhaps just custodians of it, and if they they don't probably set off thinking, I'm 22, I'm going to set up a watch brand, and it's going to last for 200 years at least, and I'm going to lay the foundations for what the brand's going to look like in 200 years time. They're probably doing it to make a few quid. They're adventurous, like, was it Ben Francis, the Gymshark guy? He was like 20 years old when he set up Gymshark, the clothing and all that sort of thing. I don't think he probably didn't think, right, I'm making gym clothes for the next 100 years. I might not be in the business, but perhaps my ethos of Gymshark is gonna last. And then you get occasions where the DNA of the founder and the original ideas runs straight through the brand and continues to do so today. Hans Wilsdorf and the Oyster case. That's what Rolex talk about today, and you got Mercedes Gleets swimming across the channel with the Oyster case, and we're all still wearing Rolex Oyster case watches today. So that's something that's kind of transcends the founder. It was such a good idea, and it's still going today. I'm not sure that answers your question, but anyway, there we go.
I suppose it was once revived. What do you do with the legacy? Do you stick to the archives, or do you reimagine freely? But so far there isn't a one size fits all, which is great, and there doesn't seem to be any one. There isn't a blueprint for the success of a brand that has had a hiatus. So I mean, I love the romance of the Resurrection brands, but that's partly why the industry is so fascinating to me as well, because of its longevity. Equally, new brands, for example, William Wood, the heritage, it's based on, it has a story to it. It's still a new brand, but it's still a wonderful story and legitimate product and great watches with a great founder. And he clearly is also a very clever marketeer, is Johnny Garrett. But that seems to work very well. But that's not a reinvention. That's an invention.
But that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, has Johnny Garrett wondered what he's going to do with the brand as he gets older? You take Max Busser. His thing about a creative adult is a child that survived, and his whole idea about the creativity of an individual can be sort of lost by education. Your creativity as a child shouldn't be hammered out of you by life, by education, by experience so much. And yeah, he's got this amazing watch brand MB&F, and the creations, they are horological creations. I don't know. I think he has got children, but are they going to be interested in the business? He's still a young man, and he can live a long time. But it would be interesting to say to him, are you building a brand forever, or are you building a brand that maybe, I don't know, I'm going to say dies with you, or when you want to give up, you stop, and the brand stops. Can anybody take MB&F with such a clear identity on? And you think, well, you think about Audemars Piguet, for example, which when anybody thinks of Audemars Piguet, they think of the Royal Oak, designed by Gerald Genter, didn't really have anything to do with the family of Audemars or Piguet. But that's a watch that saved a brand, and set a trend for the whole industry for the last 50, 60 years. But it's not founder related. It's evolution, isn't it? Really, and being attuned to the times and evolving to market circumstances, or if you're really bold in 1972, you create a market that you didn't know existed, but now everybody wears an integrated sports watch on a bracelet. That's kind of a thing. So I don't know. You can respect the past. You can celebrate the iconic models in a collection, but I think there has to be an element of reinvention. Otherwise, you do just stand still, and maybe you get washed away.
Yeah, so the reimagining freely has got to be a big part of it, and the brands have got to be forward thinking. Max from MBNF, he wouldn't have gone. I don't know. These are not insignificant. Even in the 1800s, these wouldn't have been insignificant startups. Startups now versus. So there would have been these, and I feel like such an underachiever. Gosh, these people are in their early 20s, and they what they achieved at that point in their lives and where they've gone. So yes, perhaps nobody necessarily knew that the longevity and how far into the future they would go.
Yeah.
However, they clearly had the foresight to start it and continue it and back it. So the romance of resurrection, do we love the watches or the idea of it itself? And do we care at all? Or are we buying the poetry of rebirth, I suppose?
I mean, it's probably horses for courses, isn't it? But I think it depends how deeply you are invested in the history of watches. Maybe most of the people who own a Rolex Submariner don't care about the diving heritage so much, or people who maybe if you bought a Zenith chronograph, an El Primero or something, maybe you're a bit more into the history of watches. But people just like stuff because they like it. They like the style of it, or their friend's got a Rolex Submariner, so therefore they're going to buy one, even though the only water it sees is when they wash their hands. So that heritage of the Submariner, I wouldn't say it doesn't matter, because that design has to come from somewhere. But it depends how deeply people want to get into things, like the Hermes Birkin bag. Do the people who buy the Birkin bag got to understand how that came about? And does it matter? People just want a Birkin bag because the girl next door's got one. Well,
the girl next door won't have one.
But you know what I mean.
I think it's different, because I think the technical element from the watch industry is very different from what puts it apart from the wider luxury industry, element. So if you're talking about a Birkin versus a watch of similar ilk that's difficult to get hold of, they both have status, but yeah. I don't know if I don't know if it's part of the same conversation, if I'm honest, because I think for me that the element, what we're talking about today, the resurrection, the phoenix rising through the ashes, it's because there is a history to it and a heritage, and it's an industry that's fiercely proud of its DNA. Mm-hmm. Therefore, when these brands, and it's not necessarily the ones that have just have had a hiatus. You've just referenced Zenith, and earlier this week we saw the launch of their they've done a collaboration with
USM.
The furniture. Now they've used the Revival, which is one of their original pieces, and it's not what they're necessarily known for, and they've gone with bright primary colors, and it looks brilliant. Yeah. So
yeah, based on the USM colours that are used there for their furniture. So that's a collab, isn't it?
Yeah, but there's still there. I think there's still that element of people recognise the brand and the technicality. So I don't know. I think Hermes and luxury watches can sit in the same conversation about status, and about and desire and that and high end luxury. But I wonder if there's the technical element and the romance of these, because we've just referenced, looking back, all of the people that were involved originally with the stories. I don't think people from the, as you said, that buys a Hermes bag has got too much understanding. I mean, I don't know, perhaps actually it'd be wonderful to know from our audience what they think. Have I got this completely wrong? Does anybody who's watching this who has a Hermes and a Birkin in particular, is their history any relevance to their purchase and the desire behind the brand? I don't know. I always reference, particularly when I'm meeting with new brands, and they've taken the time. It always blows my mind when someone has taken the time to start with a new watch brand, particularly in this age, because it's a really crowded space. It's a great space because they're at all levels now. Barrier to entry is much lower. The big brands, the Goliaths, are still doing really well. It's quite a challenging time at the moment. If we feel that these resurrections, particularly the ones that are just happening and haven't necessarily got the following behind it, and it hasn't got the collectors buy-in just yet, let's use Universal Genève because it's within the next 12 months. And what do you think is going to happen based on the current market?
I think based on the collector community being into the vintage Universals, there will be there's probably an acceptance that the styles, the pole router design, or the the tri-compacts, etc. There's an understanding there from the collector community that they might want to buy into the new models, and then for people who kind of just like watches, you've got to assume that it's not a closed shop to anybody saying, oh, that's a really interesting looking watch, and finding out about the pole router and liking the history once they've kind of read about it, because it will be all over the internet and stuff. So I would expect Universal to do reeditions of the original models. And they've got lots of other things, like is it the White Shadow, the slim watches that they did. So they're not a mono product design. I'm not being disparaging to Panerai, but they're not a Luminor or a Radiomir. Universal made watches for men and women. They made watches that were dressy and jewelry type watches, and they made watches that would, I don't know, time the artillery fire in the Second World War. So I don't know, Universal.
One could say they were a universal brand.
Well, exactly like what you did there. So I mean, they've got lots to play with. Yeah. But I think they would respect the DNA of Universal. I think that would be the game.
Yeah. Why do you think that this brand hasn't had the attention and it being attempted to be resurrected previously?
Well, coming back to George Kearney, I mean, he's a clever guy, and I can't remember how long he's been at Breitling. Is it maybe 10 years or so? But he's done some amazing things at Breitling, like the ladies' Navitimer and the the smaller size chronomats and all that sort of thing. But he's sort of reinterpreted some of the classic designs, but I don't know, and this is just me guessing, how long before that doesn't become uninteresting to him, but is kind of quite formulaic, because you're working within a confine of maybe what Breitling is to a certain extent. But resurrecting Universal or Gallet can be seen as a challenge, as a different challenge, and maybe that's what piques his interest.
Okay, so then that goes back to the ingenuity and the audacity of the person behind it. So the brand no longer is just about Breitling; it is about George Kern.
Well, I mean, that's me speculating.
Yeah.
I can say that,
No,
but
I'm just,
yeah,
yeah, no, I just wondered. And then therefore it's, so once you've got that, somebody that has that foresight and
yeah,
that constant, their interest is constantly piqued. It's like, well, okay, this is doing well. Breitling was always established. They didn't need
yeah,
necessarily George. However, it has the personality behind the brand.
yeah.
And now suddenly these two other brands, one's much more lower price point
Mhm.
and the other one is higher. I think you said that you think Zheje are going to be the ones that probably most affected in terms of
Yeah.
the price point where it sits. We'll find out
Yeah,
next year, because
sure.
I mean, we don't know what the collection looks like, therefore we
Sure.
don't know where it's going to sit within the
Mhm.
market. But the other thing, the financial implications and the economic implications, we're just, we're aware of more price changes at the moment. So that wouldn't necessarily have been factored in. Well, actually, I say that someone probably would have factored in industry price increases when they decided on this journey, because it wouldn't have been something they decided overnight. This has been in the making for quite a long time before they announced it, and has still been delayed a year. So, okay, so I personally think it's the watches that people are interested in, and the idea of I don't think you can have a great brand without great watches. I think you have to have the product behind it, and for me is the DNA as well. Or
I mean,
there is the one that stands alone, doesn't it?
it does probably come back to a good design and an iconic design. There's probably a reason why the Speedmaster is one of the best selling lines from Amiga, and it's been around since 50, 60 years, whatever it is, looking pretty much the same, but evolved internally and exploited by Amiga as their iconic watch. But they hit on something with the design of that watch. It's been to the moon. You've got the whole romance, and then you got modern technology. You've got the Metas tested movements, which couldn't have been barely imagined rather in the 1960s. You've got to love how it looks. It just works a lot better today than it did 50 years ago.
Yeah.
I wish I could say the same about me, but that's the whole other story.
Perhaps these brands just never really die. Maybe we just love playing archaeologist, and they're unearthed when we're ready to, or somebody with the foresight and the deep pockets to do so.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'd love to know what the listeners think, and what they think of the brands that are coming back that have already got a story to them, or whether they think there's enough space to just start a new brand. Mark, I've really enjoyed this conversation. It's been one that, since we learned about Universal Genève relaunching, it keeps coming back to the storytelling for me. It just keeps coming back to the stories, keep coming back to the storytelling. And then the watches have to be great. So it's you can have a great story, but a ghastly watch. But that's just potentially what I consider ghastly doesn't necessarily translate to sales. I've made many a bad buying decision based on my own opinion, which is probably why I'm not best placed as a watch buyer any longer. But thank you so much. Have you got any closing thoughts about this topic?
No, I mean perhaps the fractures in the industry that cause some of these changes. I mean, you can't really do anything about a revolution breaking out in Russia or something, back in the early 1900s. But the quartz crisis that everybody probably is dead familiar with in the 1970s, fundamentally changed the watch industry. Almost put Amiga out of business, but here they are today, batting on, doing incredibly well. And here we are today in a bit of a slowdown in luxury. There's a couple of wars going on. Precious metal prices are really up. The Swiss franc's strong. The dollar is relatively weak. China as a watch market is not what it was, and that was like the number 2 market. The number 1 market, i.e. the USA, is doing its self-inflicted 39% tariffs. That's going to have an implication for the watch industry. But I think wherever there's drama and disruption, there's also an opportunity to do amazing things, in the same way that Swatch, a plastic watch made in Switzerland, kind of indirectly saved Blancpain, Breguet, all those great horological watch brands. So I hesitate to use the word crisis, but off the top of my head, I can't think of another one. The current difficulties in the watch market and the external factors will, I guess, see some changes in the industry. But I think you've got to act. I think it's robust enough. It's seen off lots of other challenges, the 2008, 2009 financial crisis, quartz, as I mentioned. People are never going to stop wanting to tell the time, and okay, you can tell your time from a telephone, but the romance of the stories, which is kind of what your whole thing is about, people do buy into that, and they like the way watches look. So there might be some current difficulties, but everything's going to be okay. It's going to be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's been wonderful to speak with you today. Disruption, crisis, and heritage. I think it's probably quite an exciting time to be in the industry, even if it's quite nerve-wracking for a lot of retailers and brands. Yep. But love people to subscribe to the channel, leave your thoughts, and do let us know on any other subjects that you want us to talk about, because Mark and I are always happy to natter on for a long period of time about our favourite subjects. Thank you so much for joining us today. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.